and these are crowded and massed together scores of men, women, and children in close, unventilated rooms, the filthy and the proud, the lunatic and idiot, with the sane and healthy and unfortunate, without classification or care or discipline. In larger prisons, there is not filth or overcrowding, but there is not modern improvements or great measures of reform, such as have become familiar to European administrations. This was written by a New York Times untitled reporter on the December 10, 1865 issue. This is penal reform in the 1800s. Who are the people of this reform? Well, we have Dorothea Diggs. We have Francis Weber, Samuel Wrigley Howe, and Lewis White. Dorothea Diggs, she was quoted in an interview with a San Francisco paper as saying, "Our missions on this earth should be missions of mercy and peace." Some facts about Dorothea Diggs is that she was born April 4, 1802, in Hampden, Maine. She died July 17, 1887, at the age of 85. Her father was a drunkard and an indentured worker. In about 1821, she opened a school in Boston for well-to-do children. Through her works, she ended up teaching poor and neglected children from her home. On a trip to England in 1836, she met the Rathbone family. These people were prominent social reformers who were also Quakers. Here she met the people who believed the government should play direct, active role in social welfare. This also introduced her to the British ideology and the British movements in which were going on at the same time, the British reform movements. What problems existed to encourage a group of people to advocate for reform? After the Second Great Awakening, many ethical issues were brought to light, and people became aware of the injustices that were occurring in the world. This was written by a man living Gloversville, February 8, 1856, to a letter to the editor of the New York Times. The Sabbaths for quietness and church-going are not unlike the New England Sabbaths, which we knew in our younger days. This is basically showing that through the Second Great Awakening, the world started to change and go back to what the older generation knew as the good old days. Prisons were not organized by offenses against the law, gender, or even age. An example would be a small boy arrested for pickpocketing and a woman accused of killing her husband were locked away with a man who owed as little as $3 to a lender. Now this is a description of jails in 1865, also by an untitled reporter for the New York Times. The truth is, this country in penal reform is a public sanitary science, is for behind the age. The condition of the country's jails throughout the Union is a disgrace to our civilization and humanity. The country workhouses are even worse. Now the brutality and the conditions led to a lot of prisoners after they were released having such a broken spirit, they really struggled to come back. So what if a prisoner wanted another trial? Well, if a prisoner argued for another trial, the government would say, once this man's original trial took place, the courts found that the nation does not have the power to try him again. In fact, the states also do not possess this power, thus making the inmate's chances quite unlikely. No hope for justice, right? Another existing problem would be brutality. Now, brutality was a big issue. For wardens that the police officers and the wardens, they misused their power. Now, examples of this are as evident in the pictures. Now, an example of a real inmate's death during brutality would be convict Moors who died from the effects of a punishment by shower bath in the Auburn State Prison. Now, they had an inspector come in and evaluate the officers who were involved in this, and they ended up concluding that the officers involved were to have all their charges dropped due to the fact that they did not find that they had intentional recklessness or want for brutality against this inmate. But they did decide that it was not right. Shower bathing was not right, and so they abolished the use in all state prisons of their state. But we find nothing in the evidence, he later on writes, but we find nothing in the evidence to lead us to believe that those who are in danger, engaged in the infliction of punishment, intend to commit any act, either of recklessness or of brutality. This is basically where he writes his conclusions of the officers. And this is where he states, and that in any event, it is but an error of judgment in the infliction of a punishment which has been sanctioned by the proper authorities for years, but which the result in this case shows may be dangerous in any case, as it has been fatal in this. It's basically showing that while this has been used for X amount of years, it does seem to have some consequences associated with it. And this is showing that it's banned from the state prisons now in his state, and it can only be used if a physician is present. So what are some specific reforms suggested? Well, in an annual report of the New York State prison reform, we were able to see that they supplied to over 123 discharged convicts clothing that would adapt to their needs and whatever they needed necessary. And to over 145 discharged prisoners, they provided with situations in which they could earn and eat honest bread. Many families of prisoners left to destitution and suffering conditions by the incarceration of those on whom they depended for support, they also have relief from this, which helps them out. And this shows that the reform took steps forward. Now, in the same audit, in the same report, they mentioned a school ship purchased and fitted up and equipped by the Commissioners of Public Charities and Corrections now rides and waves in the New York Harbor. It was opened in September and has already numbered 200 inmates. The Executive Committee urged that the legislation of the establishment of a social prison for young transgressors. This basically shows that the government really did want the prisoners to be reformed. The reason that they want it for younger transgressors to be separated is so that they could have more of an option to be reformed, since they were young and had more of a chance. Other specific suggestions were prison libraries, the teaching of basic literacy, to read the Bible, of course, reduction of whipping and beatings, which goes along with brutality, communication of sentences, because many people, once they were sentenced, they were not informed, and so they worked to get the communication lines back together, and the separation of women and children and the sick. This also can go along with the comedian saying, this is where Dorothea Dix came in a good bit too as well. What impact did these reformers have on American society in the short term and long term? Well, in the short term, penal reform was that of the nation was more informed, was the reality of those incarcerated. The community was now aware that these brutal conditions began to work harder to improve these conditions. Also, by 1836, America was considered to have two of the best prisons in the world, both in Pennsylvania. For the long term, the penal reform movement died out around the 1920s and did not pick up until about the 1940s. Though this did plant a seed of an idea for better treatment of prisoners and striving for rehabilitation. Now, unity and liberation, sadly, did not occur. Thank you very much.